Welcome back to my podcast. I'm really glad that you made it. Today's episode is quite exciting for me. It's an important question that I get quite often, which is, how do I learn English? The way that I always answer that is by describing the way that I learned Japanese, which was by immersing in Japanese. And I'm going to explain what that means a bit later on. Basically, I learned Japanese by reading and listening a lot and making flashcards. And I studied with a piece of software called Anki, which is a way of saving all the flashcards that you make so that you can study them later. And then every day you study the flashcards that Anki tells you to study. And it's a really simple process that can be quite challenging to make the habit of turning up every day and doing all the flashcards that you need to do. But there's some tricks to that process, and I hope that I can share some really cool information about that later on. The first step really is to work out what your goal is for learning English and to think about some of the reasons why you're learning English. Like, what do you want to achieve? So is it to do with just making more friends around the world? Is it for your career? Is it for a relationship? For family reasons? Or is it just because you need to learn the language for some reason? It's just necessary. So my reason was that I moved to Japan, and Japanese is obviously the language that is spoken here, so I had to learn Japanese. Some people learn it because they just love a certain part of Japanese culture, and that's okay, but that wasn't my reason. So as I was studying, I kept in mind my reasons why, my ultimate goal, and I'll share a little bit more about that later on. But I wanted to start with a little bit of information about the software that you use and how the process works. So the first step is to find something in English that you want to study, you want to listen to, and it's really the best idea to find something that you are excited by, truly, that you are passionate about, something that you really enjoy. As you read that book, or you read the article online, or you listen to the audiobook or the podcast, you're watching a YouTube channel maybe, you're going to try to find interesting sentences in that content, and you're going to copy them and create a flashcard in Anki, which is the software that I recommend, which is free. So it's free to download on Mac and Windows, and it's also free on Android phones, and you can download it on iPhone as well, but it does cost $20. Now that's a one-time payment of $20. It's not a subscription, and so I decided to pay that. I thought that was reasonable, and I'm really glad that I did. So the process that I'm describing of listening and reading is called input. So that's things that are going in. And when you're ready to start speaking and writing, that's called output. So I'm mostly talking today about input, which is how I think that you learn the language. And after you've learned it to a certain level, you can then start producing the language. You can start to do your output. So practicing your speaking and all of that fun stuff. So when you're choosing something that you want to study, it might be a good idea. It depends how you feel. It might be a good idea to decide what kind of accent you would like to speak with eventually. So if you want to speak with an American accent, then I would suggest spending more time watching American channels, American content, listening to American voices, basically. And if it's British, spend more time listening to British people, a variety of different British people. So when it comes to Anki, it's quite user-friendly, which means that it's easy to understand because there are lots of different languages supported. So a lot of information is available in lots of different languages. So you can get the help that you need to understand it in your own language. Like, some people find it difficult downloading software and learning how to use things, learning what all the different buttons do and where all the different options are on the screen. That can be quite a challenge for some people. So don't worry, there's definitely lots of information available in your language to help you out. So the other part of the process is that you're going to need a good dictionary, and there's some really good dictionaries that I recommend. And the best kind of dictionary when you're on the internet is a dictionary where you put your mouse on the word and you click, or if you just leave the mouse on top of the word, you just hover, then the dictionary definition comes up on the screen, and you can then look in the dictionary directly and then copy the sentence, put it on your flashcard and add the dictionary definition, and then later on you'll start studying that flashcard and you shouldn't really have any problems remembering that word after that. It should be quite easy. So you're going to listen to and read things that you're really interested in, that make you really excited. And if you're watching a video, try to use English subtitles if you can. That will be the best. And then when you see an interesting word, grab the whole sentence. Don't just grab the word and put that on your flashcard. Grab the whole sentence, and that's called sentence mining. Some people call it sentence mining. It's like mining for gold or something. So it's the same kind of idea, like you're mining for treasure. And it sometimes feels kind of like exploring, like you're hunter-gathering, I guess. And it's a really fun process when you get into it. And so when you make a new flashcard, you're going to add it to your flashcard deck. And then it's called a deck because if you've got, for example, a deck of playing cards, there's like 52 playing cards, like the 8 of hearts and the Queen of diamonds, for example. There's 52 of those, and there's 52 cards in the deck. And for flashcards, we use the same idea. It's called a flashcard deck. So the way that flashcards work is by something called spaced repetition. And spaced repetition software is something like Anki, that it manages all of the flashcards that you need to learn on any particular day. It tells you what to study every day, basically, so you don't have to worry about trying to work out which words you forgot. Or so if you would just write your words down in a book on paper, let's say you write down the word and the sentence in a book, you might end up looking at your sentences too often, like you don't need to see them that often to remember them, and it becomes quite inefficient. So the spaced repetition software helps you to organize and to only study the things that you need to see on any particular day, which saves you a lot of time in the end. So the trick is to just study as many flashcards every day as Anki tells you to do. And the other trick is don't introduce too many new cards every day. So at first, try adding 5 new flashcards every day and studying all of the ones that you have to review from previous days. So my advice is to go steady in the beginning, because it can be quite overwhelming. There's definitely been times where I felt like I was trying to add about 25 new flashcards every day, and I felt like I was going crazy, basically. It was too much, because certain days you end up having to study about 200 or 300 flashcards, and it just becomes impossible, basically. So I'd recommend going really easy in the beginning and just get used to it. Increase your pace gradually and think about the long-term goal. We say slow and steady wins the race. And it's kind of an idea that exists in lots of different languages really around the world. Like the idea of the hare and the tortoise is a famous one from English. So the hare runs really quickly around and gets really tired, and the tortoise just slowly keeps going, and eventually the tortoise wins the race. And it's that kind of thing, really, when you're studying flashcards. So go steady. So there's also extra software that you can get to help you get not just the sentence that you want to study, but also the piece of audio that goes with it. So if you're watching a YouTube video, for example, or something on Netflix, you can actually grab that little clip, the sentence from that clip, and you can add that to your flashcard as well, which is really cool. So if anybody's interested in having flashcards of this podcast episode, I can make those flashcards quite easily and provide them if you join the Discord community. I'll tell you a bit more about that later. Learning a language like this can be really, really fun. I found it to be a lot of fun. You're learning by reading things that you really are interested in. So I studied Harry Potter a lot. I read all 7 Harry Potter books in Japanese, and I listened to it on the audiobook twice, all the way through. So all 7 books twice, and I also read the books on my computer as well, and that was a lot of fun. So I was able to find a way of adding the audio from the audiobook with the sentence from Harry Potter. So I had Harry Potter flashcards, and I must have made about 500 flashcards from Harry Potter, if not more. Probably more, to be honest. And so what you want to find is sentences that have only one word that you don't understand. Let's take an example of a really good sentence to study which only has one word that you don't understand. And so let's say you're watching a video and somebody says, I have a pen in my hand, but there's no ink. And you understand every word. You understand what a pen is and a hand, and it's really easy, but you don't know what ink means. You're sat there thinking, what's ink? And then you look in the dictionary and you think, oh, okay, ink. That's the black liquid inside the pen. That makes sense. So I'll make a flashcard, and then I'll never forget the word ink. So after you've done that, you just move on, you keep watching the video, and then sometime in the next few days, you'll start to study that flashcard, and you'll remember making the flashcard in the first place, and then you'll see it again, and you'll start to study it. And because Anki tells you when to study the flashcard every time, you're basically never going to forget the word ink again. And you just repeat that process for however many words you want to learn. Let's say it's 10,000, or, some people might say it's 15,000, or even just 6,000. It depends what your goal is. So I want to talk a little bit deeper about how to make a flashcard and what they look like. So obviously you have the front side, and then when you turn it over you have the back. And on the front, it's like a little test. It's like it's testing you. Do you understand this sentence? And so you have 2 options, yes or no. You understand it well, or you don't. And so if you understand it, you click good. And if you don't, you click again. And then on the back side of the flashcard, you have the dictionary definition. And sometimes you have the audio on the front, sometimes you have the audio on the back, or sometimes you have it on both. It's quite flexible, so you can choose your own style of flashcard. I definitely encourage you to do that. So I mentioned before that you should grab the whole sentence. And in our example sentence, we had a sentence that said, I have a pen, but there's no ink. So if you just made a flashcard that said ink, it might be quite difficult to remember all of the context, all of the information that came with that word ink. And it's actually harder to remember. Even though the flashcard is shorter, the sentence helps you to remember where it came from and how it connected to different information in the book or the video that you were watching. So I definitely recommend getting the whole sentence. So the really cool thing about flashcards is that when you start to learn a new word and Anki learns that, okay, he understands this word, it makes the interval longer. So that means that instead of showing you the flashcard again in 3 days or 4 days, it'll show you again in 7 days. And then after you study it again in 7 days, you pass quite easily again, and then it'll show you again in 14 days, and it keeps getting longer. So then it might be 30 days after that, and then it might be 3 months. It just keeps getting longer and longer until you don't really need to see it again. You've actually taken that word and put it in your long-term memory. And you basically won't forget words that are in your long-term memory. I find that some students want to start speaking much sooner than other students. For me, my goal was not really about speaking so much as understanding. So I did lots and lots of input and much less output. And I still haven't practiced my speaking a lot. So I'm still not really confident of my Japanese speaking, but that's actually because that wasn't my goal. So I followed the process that I've described in this podcast so far. I just read books. In my job, I was able to spend as much time as I wanted every day. It was unlimited, other than there are 24 hours in a day. But I sometimes spent 10 hours a day listening, and that was too much, really. So I'd be listening to an audiobook for 10 hours, or podcasts. I made MP3 files of dramas and movies and YouTube channels. But I found that I could only manage about 6 hours a day was about my maximum before I started to feel like I was going crazy, and like my ears were actually hurting a bit. They were a bit sore from having earphones in my ears all day. So I found that it was a real treat to do my immersion for the day and then take out my earphones and put them away. And then maybe later I would do some reading practice as well. So I want to encourage you to not do too much, but don't do too little as well. You want to push yourself a little bit, but don't push yourself too hard. Be gentle on yourself. And again, be in it for the long term. So I want to speak a little bit about what my goals were. For me, when I came here to Japan, I wanted to be able to understand everything, and I knew that we would have a family, that we would have children, me and my wife. And I wanted to learn Japanese a long time before my daughter. So I didn't want a situation where my daughter would grow up and her Japanese would be better than mine. Even at a young age, I didn't want that. So by the time she was like 6 or 7, she might be way better than me at Japanese, and I don't even understand what she's saying. I was kind of scared of that idea, so that really pushed me forward. As far as I'm concerned, I actually reached my goal of understanding Japanese. So I learned about 20,000 words in Japanese, and I had a system for counting how many words I knew in Anki. And I can tell you now that my daughter is 5, and she speaks to me mostly in Japanese, and there's basically nothing that she says to me that I don't understand. We have a really great relationship. She speaks to me in Japanese, and I speak to her in English, and she understands basically everything I'm saying to her as well, but she feels more comfortable in Japanese, and that's okay. She immerses with YouTube channels in English like Peppa Pig and Curious George and stuff like that. And so from my perspective, I'm very proud of myself to have reached my goal. And if I want to make more progress in Japanese, the next thing would be to make another goal about speaking and shadowing. So choose somebody that I want to copy, and that's a different process. That's called shadowing. It's quite a simple idea. I've done a little bit of that, but I would need to do a lot more in order to get my mouth used to making those sounds all the time consistently. And since then we've had 2 more children. We've got 2 boys as well as my daughter, and it's the same for all of them. My son is 2 and my youngest son is 6 months old now, and so I will be able to understand everything that they tell me. And what's funny is that my son already speaks, he's already happier to speak English, so he copies me more than my daughter did at the same age. She was copying her mother much more. And so that's really interesting to see the difference in how they learn the language as a native language, as their mother tongue. It's something that I'm really fascinated by, how children learn their mother tongue, and how if you have people around them talking in any language, they'll learn 5 or 6 different languages quite easily if they have people around talking to them. So this process that I'm talking about today is actually a very similar idea, and a lot of the scientific research that is done on language is centered around studying the way that adults can learn the same way that children learn. It's a really interesting field of study. So for you need to work out what your goal is in English. It might be the same as me, where you don't particularly mind having a high level of speaking ability. Lots of people do want to speak. Obviously, it's English is kind of like a international language of communication, really. So obviously, lots of people want to speak English, and they want to speak it quite soon. They're quite impatient to begin speaking. It's really exciting, and it feels very necessary for them to speak as soon as possible. And so some people might start speaking earlier, maybe after 6 months of making flashcards and learning new words. They're already desperate to start speaking and practicing what they know. For some people it might be much earlier than that. It might be more like 3 months, or even earlier maybe. My job as a teacher is to support people, whatever their goal is, to support them in the choices that they make, and to give feedback and advice. And I can help people find interesting things to watch and listen to and read. So some other things that you'll need to decide is how much time you have each day for studying, and how you can fill gaps in your day. So if you spend time driving, could you listen to a podcast when you're driving? If you're going to do some cooking, could you watch a YouTube video and chop some vegetables at the same time? Could you listen to an audiobook at the same time? Could you listen to a book when you're in the bath, when you're on a break at work, or any other time in your day? So decide how many of those gaps you could possibly fill with little bits of extra study, and they can make a real difference to your progress. And you'll need a calm place to work, preferably somewhere quiet, where you're not going to be distracted, which might be difficult if you've got children. I understand that. I definitely have challenges now doing the work that I need to do when children are in the house. So I want to tell a little story about my experiences with immersion. When I did my teacher training, we had a class, and my 5 classmates and I went into the classroom one day, and we had a new teacher. She started speaking to us in a language that none of us knew. And our job was to listen to her and try to follow her instructions. She used her hands, her body, and certain objects to help us understand, but she didn't speak any English in the lesson. We could write words down to try and remember them, and we had to try and do the activities in the classroom, the games that she suggested, and we would try to copy the words she was saying. We sometimes had the chance to speak to each other and practice the new words that we were learning. And so after the class, we went home and we wrote a report about the lesson, some new words that we'd learned, so we'd try and write them down, remember them, and try to guess what they mean as well, using the information that we had, using the context of the lesson, to try and work out what they meant, which was really fun. We had 4 lessons in total, And I think that I learned about 25 words. And I remember very clearly being excited to go through this process because our teacher made it really fun. She did everything that she could to help us understand and support our learning. She tried to be a model, an example of the language that she was speaking. So the goal of the lesson was for us all to experience directly what it was like for our students to be in an English lesson where only English was used. So it's an immersion classroom, which was a fantastic opportunity. I really enjoyed it. We also studied pronunciation. I really enjoyed that. But I do think that learning the foreign language might have been my favourite part of the course. It's really hard to say because I enjoyed the grammar, I enjoyed the pronunciation, but it was such a thrill to learn a new language directly and to know that it was possible. I never did anything like that, and it was so different to the way that I learned French in a classroom, which, like for most people, you sit at your desk and the teacher talks to you, and then one day she tells you to try and speak and you're not interested. Like, that was my experience. Some people love it, but I hated it. I only got interested in French later, much later in life. Definitely not at school. And so eventually we found out what the name of the language was. It was a real language. It was Swedish. So we'd spent 4 lessons, 4 hours, learning Swedish without knowing that it was Swedish. And they chose Swedish because none of us knew Swedish at all. We already told them which foreign languages we spoke, and nobody mentioned Swedish. And so it really taught me the value of patience in a teacher and the importance of speaking clearly, being a really good example, a good demonstration of good pronunciation and good communication, with patience, with kindness, with trying to get on the student's level and try to understand where they're coming from. That was a big part of my training, and it made a really big difference on the way that I try to speak to foreign people, such as yourself in this podcast. And so another story that I had was about when I went travelling around France. Like I mentioned, I got really excited about learning French as an adult, and I decided to go to France. But unfortunately, I didn't completely commit to immersing myself in French. I visited places where the people spoke English, and that was a mistake. This was before I really understood the idea of immersion. And so in 6 months, I did learn a little bit of French. It was really good to see the country, to eat the food, to meet people, to listen to the accent, and to get a feeling of the country, but I did not learn a lot of French in my time there. So that was an example where I thought that I was immersing, but I wasn't fully committed. I wasn't brave enough to fully commit to immersing. The other time that I did manage to immerse was when I went to Indonesia for 4 weeks. But in Indonesia, I was travelling with my friend who spoke English. So I didn't get a lot of chances to immerse, but I did have some very good occasions to practice some of the words that I was learning in Indonesian. And in 4 weeks, I managed to learn about 50 new words, I think, which I was quite pleased with. And I found it really interesting. I wrote everything down in a book, and I was reading that every day, trying to, work it out. Because I also thought that I might go and live in Indonesia as well. But I didn't in the end. And my favourite experience in Indonesia in terms of language was we went on a boat trip, and I met a guy there who wanted to learn English. And I thought, perfect, right. I want to learn Indonesian. He wants to learn English. And so we did a little language exchange. So I also learned from that experience, which was so exciting for me, the value of having a language partner, and you can teach each other and have a really great time. And we managed to communicate even though my Indonesian was not very good and his English wasn't very good either. But we both really enjoyed meeting each other and getting to know each other a little bit. So after I came home from Indonesia, I didn't have another opportunity to immerse in a language until I did Swedish in my teacher training. And then after that, I didn't have another chance until I came to Japan, really. I've been here for 8 years studying the way that I'm recommending today, and it's gone really well for me. I also learned the kanji in Japanese, and I did that with a little bit of a different technique. Although I did use flashcards in the beginning, I actually made a memory palace. So I walk around a place that I know. I walk around my hometown in England, just in my mind. And at every different place that I walk around, I can actually see some of the kanji. I've actually put kanji in different places in my mind. And if anybody's interested in hearing about that, I can do another podcast episode about that, which is really interesting. And one of my goals is to pass the Japanese kanji test, the kanji kente. And so I'm hoping to do that, I guess, this year sometime, or sometime next year maybe. I'm really glad that you listened today. I'm glad that you're still listening here at the end, and that I have an English language community on Discord so that we can do some of the language exchange that I've talked about. You can get my help, my support, and also connect with other English students there as well. So you can have conversations with each other. You can have conversations with me, voice chats, messages, things like that. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe and let me know in the comments anything at all, really, anything you'd like to mention, any feedback that you have, and good luck. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help you, and thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.